Before we dive into the episode here, I just wanted to thank you for checking out our inaugural episode of Vibing with AI Code. We talk a little bit about our developer origin stories, our experiences so far with AI, and a little bit about what we might talk about in the future. So hopefully you enjoy the podcast. And I also just want to mention that we are sponsored by Fireside FM. If you're looking for a great podcast hosting platform that's been around since 2016, check them out. That's where we're hosted. And hopefully you enjoy the show. Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. Looking forward to recording here.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so I thought, being our first episode, we should just talk a little bit about ourselves here to start and, kind of see where the conversation goes. But, I think it's good to point out we're brothers. I'm Brendan, you're Baird. I'll let you give a bigger introduction to yourself here in a minute. But, one of the reasons, from my perspective, why we wanted to do this is because we have these conversations anyways. Figured why not record them? And we're both developers, and for me, I'm a Ruby on Rails developer. You might have heard my other podcast, the Rails Business Podcast, but we're not necessarily going to focus on just Rails here. That's one of the appeals for me as well, is like we can talk more AI and AI coding and maybe other AI things. But for me, I'm doing a lot of AI coding. You're doing a lot of AI coding. Mine's primarily in Ruby and Rails, and of course, there's JavaScript in the mix there too. But yeah, just talking about it more, getting stuff out there and what we think. So why don't you give a little intro as well, kind of what your background is with whatever you want to share.
Yeah, I've been building apps, websites for 15 years now, and I've been doing it solo for pretty much the whole time, and find that AI is pretty interesting to, start to actually have somebody that's almost like a intern or somebody to help out. So it's been really pushing on that to see how that works. But yeah, really just exploring the edges of how you can build stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting point what you just said there, like having an intern essentially with AI or like you said, you mostly have been solo. And I've worked on a lot of teams, but I also like to explore that essentially the extension of having AI be like a partner and working with me, on my own side projects and stuff. And yeah, maybe let's explore that a little bit more. Just kind of like what is the workflow that both of us have been doing so far with AI? Like, what is our experience? Why don't you go first?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it started out, playing with Claude, ChatGPT, and just like having it produce code. Kind of like I would equate it to Stack Overflow. You'd be like, oh, how do I do this? And you go out over to Stack Overflow and ask the question, and you take that and copy and paste. And like that didn't really work. Like I don't know if you had the same experience. Like it was kind of like Stack Overflow. It's like it would kind of work sometimes, but you'd spend most of the time just rewriting it. And so from there, as I've kind of gone through different transitions at work, it's like, how can I really like use it as an extension, like not having to write all the code myself, but use it as like a way to give it thoughts, have it generate stuff, and then iterate on it from there. And just like really try to embed it directly into the workflow rather than like having it as a, tool that sits outside of it. And, having Cursor and Windsurf that have come about recently, has really changed that because you then have the agent in your IDE, which helps. But even, like we talked about it before, like I've been playing around with building iOS apps in the same way, just using Claude externally since Xcode doesn't have that capabilities. And it's really like, from my perspective, helping plan things, like talking back and forth with the bot to kind of figure out like, what is the plan? How can I break this down into chunks so that it's more likely that I'm going to achieve what I want to out of it? And then like working together to like build out features, giving it context, and just iterating until you get it to the right thing. So it's really that extension of a human rather than like, hey, it's doing my job for me.
Mm-hmm.
How about you?
Yeah, a lot of the same, honestly. I mean, and I think I'll just touch on, the name of this podcast is Vibing with AI Code. And in some ways that's kind of in jest because like neither one of us feels like we can vibe code an app in a way that we're just going to like one shot it. And I think I wanted to point that out too, just because like the workflow you just talked through and the workflow that I've found that works are very similar, like using the tools in a, I don't want to say traditional developer workflow, but
Sure.
more of that traditional developer workflow than just, hey, I want to build Spotify. Give
Yeah.
me Spotify, right? That's not going to work. It doesn't matter if it's a human or an AI agent. Um, and so for me, like I've tried that for fun, and it maybe works for like a prototype of something to
Sure.
just see like, oh, that's cool, and now I'm done with it. But yeah, like day to day and like the apps that I've actually built so far with it, and I haven't released anything. And that's probably the difference between the two of us so far is like you're using it more for work. I don't code as much for work,
Sure.
but I am trying to incorporate Cursor and Windsurf. I haven't messed with Claude Code, but I've been interested in it.
Yeah.
Been hearing a lot of good stuff about it, and we'll definitely touch on that some more. But yeah, I mean, my workflow is a lot like yours, except I do want to point out, like I've mentioned already, I do a lot of Ruby on Rails primarily. You do what? I mean, you can fill in the blanks, but you've done a lot of iOS. You already touched on that. A lot of I guess React and Next or whatever.
Yeah.
And maybe at some point we should just talk about that too. Like, what is the difference, or what do we see between like Rails and Next, or even iOS? Because that's a whole different thing. Like you don't have Xcode, or Cursor is not Xcode, and so there's
Yeah.
differences there. And now I'm like all over the place too, by the way. So like I don't even think I answered your question.
I think we're pretty similar in how we use it, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think it is interesting though. To your point, is that being able to use a bot or whatever for coding, you don't actually have to worry as much about the actual language itself. Like it really like you can abstract out to the logic and the flow
Right.
and the architecture, and you can talk to the bot from that perspective instead of saying like because for me I've never built a full product in Swift UI. Like so
Hmm.
I know Swift and I know enough of Swift UI to like have some familiarity with it, but I've never like built a full app.
Right.
So going into the stuff we've been doing lately with iOS, like I now have like 3 different apps. I've actually just built the prototype for Mac OS, like an actual native OS app. It's the first time I've ever done it, and using the same process, like it generates the code for you enough that as long as you have like just a cursory understanding of code itself and just like basic structures of languages, you don't have to be like proficient in it to at least build something, simple. Like, of course, you're not going to like go out and build, as you say, the next Spotify, doing it
Hmm.
like that if you don't have enough understanding. But you also can learn that way as well. Like for me, it always was like I would learn things that I didn't know by just going out and doing it. It wasn't like I would read all the documentation. It'd be like, what do I want to build? And then how do I build it using this technology? And I find with AI, you can still do that type of thing. You can just do it a little more in line instead of having to like go dig through all the documentation and all of the, Stack Overflow and all your Google searches. It's just like you get that logic out, you get that structure out, and then it helps you like shape it into what you want it to be without worrying about that like code layer quite as much.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think it's important too to just emphasize like working with the AI versus just like treating the AI as a tool.
Yeah,
Because what you just talked about there, like you don't necessarily have to be a programmer, you don't necessarily have to understand the code, but you do have to learn what the
yeah,
process is, how the process works, at least some version of it to get something working out. And using the AI as a coworker essentially to make sure that it's double checking things or you're questioning it on what it puts out,
yeah,
let alone just like, I mean, I know you feel the same way, like doing a code review on it. Like from my
yeah,
perspective, because I haven't pushed anything into production from this sort of AI stuff that I've done, I haven't gone as deep, but if I was pushing code to production, I would 100% be opening a pull request and looking at that
sure,
code and wanting to actually understand maybe not every single line, but I want
yeah,
to understand the whole thing. I don't want to just use the UI. And
yeah,
so that's the thing where, like vibe coding as, the term is kind of meant to go for. It's like that implies like you don't need to know anything about software development
yeah,
process. And I think that that's something that is a flaw. And sure, you can maybe get an app out, but what are you going to do when it gets into production and now you got to scale or whatever? And that's maybe getting too in the weeds too. Like that's a
Yeah.
whole nother topic, but it's an interesting point, I think.
Yeah. And it very much is, you can still say like what we do is vibe coding, but the
Hmm.
difference is that if you have, whether it's the knowledge, if you already are a developer and you're doing it, or if you are curious and are willing to like figure out what it is doing, it's possible. But it very much is like if you let the AI do all the things for you, you lose the most important part, which is the context. And
Right.
anybody that uses AI knows that if you don't have the proper context, yeah, it's going to do something for you. But the next time you need it to do something for you, if it doesn't have context, if it doesn't have you telling it like where you want it to do and have the knowledge of like how you would want it
Hmm.
to do it, like it doesn't just remember everything perfectly and then like reapply it. It's like it'll relook at it fresh, and without that domain knowledge, without that understanding, like I've seen some pretty bad things that AI can do when it's just like re-looking at things, even if it's looked at it before. So it really is like, I don't like the one-shot vibe coding because it very much is like it's going to be magic, like this is crypto and metaverse all over again, where it's like this is the snake oil salespeople that are giving you something that's like magic, but
Yep.
to do it right, you actually have to understand it, understand the use cases, and like there's got to be a human actually involved to make it good. Like
Hmm.
one of my favorite things that I've heard and learned about AI is like AI is going to make average the typical, like it's the standard, the default. Like it's going to make
Yeah.
being average easy. But there's a difference between being average and actually being good. Like, and that's
Right.
the key is like if you use it right, you can go from being average to being good.
Hmm.
But if you just like use it as the default off the shelf stuff, it's like you're gonna be average by default because that's that's
That's
what
what
an
it spits
LLM is.
out.
It's a probability machine. So it's like you're gonna get right in the average pretty
Hmm.
typically. So it's like, how do you use that as your baseline, but then use your domain knowledge, use your experience to actually make it something good?
Right. And that brings up a thought in my head anyways about like if you go to any of the tools V0 or whatever, Bolt, Lovable,
Yeah,
whatever, and you tell it, build me an app, and you go to all three of them maybe, or however many there are, there's tons of those things,
yeah,
like they're all using, like you said, kind of an average. It's going to be basically average. The design is going to be
yep,
very similar, especially if you give it all the same prompt.
yeah.
And I think design is also a kind of an interesting thing with AI that
Oh, for sure.
I you probably have even more perspective than I do on that with the I'm not a huge front end person. Obviously, if I'm going to work on things like this, I need to get better at it.
Sure.
But yeah, I've got a lot of things that in my head juggling around, but just to finish that thought, it's like the design part and just like the averageness of just if you wanted to throw it into the LLM or throw it into one of those tools, you're not going to get much out of it, especially right away. But I think the other thing that's kind of I've been thinking about here is like the learning aspect. Like there's a
Yep.
huge opportunity to make yourself better. Like you were saying, like you could be the average person if you just go with it, but you
Yep.
could take the opportunity to learn from it, ask it questions, treat it like, not even necessarily an intern, but just like a coworker that you can learn from. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind too. It's like you've probably seen it and read about it, but just like, the atrophying of your own skills. If
Yeah.
all you're doing is telling the AI to do something and you're not taking the time to learn or even understand what it's doing, then at some point, like you are going to lose some of your skills, I think. Um,
Oh, yeah. No, they've actually been doing a lot of studies about that, and there's pretty irrefutable evidence that like you do. Like if you outsource all of your thinking, you're doing all of it to AI, like you lose it, or at
mhm,
least it, like you say, atrophies. So like, yeah, you could get it back, but it's going to take more work. And
right.
yeah, I mean, that's one of the other things I've done too is like, and this is just AI in general, but it's like have AI also like push back on you, like give
Hmm.
you a different perspective, not just like agree with you, because that's another issue with AI right now is it's sycophant. it'll sit there and be like, yeah, you're amazing, man. Like, that's the coolest thing ever. And it's terrible, So
Mm-hmm.
it's like having it actually push back, and you can like give it that, instruction of like, hey, if you see anything that's not right here, push back. Tell me a different, you don't have to accept it necessarily, but it like using it as that different perspective, like having another person to talk to check if your thinking is right, or at
Yep.
least is, there aren't holes in it or whatever. It is very powerful. But again, it keeps your brain in the loop. It doesn't like outsource everything to the bot. It's like giving you an augmentation to enhance what you're already doing and potentially push you, like you say, down new paths and learning new things that you might not have thought about. And so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like I'm all for people using these tools if they never programmed anything before, because I think of, myself when I started this back, 15 years ago. I was in forums asking questions about things, and people are always like, man, you're an idiot. And it's like, yeah, I am, but this is how you
Gotta
learn.
start somewhere.
Exactly. And so having that tool now, if you're willing to engage with it, to actually like use it to learn, use it to figure things out, rather than, again, just giving it to the AI to do for you. Like, you can get so much better results that way.
Yep. Yeah, and another thing that I don't know how much you do this, and I don't always do it either, but another thing that you can do, rather than just saying build me a feature or whatever, you could say this is what I'm looking to build. Give me three different versions of this.
Sure.
And then that keeps you also in the loop of, okay, well, I don't trust the AI to pick the right version first, for one.
Yeah.
And also, I still want to give my input. I've got experience that I want to, like I know the right way, or at least I know the way I'm thinking.
Sure.
Maybe the AI will give me something more interesting or better or whatever. That's just one example that I've done at least a couple times.
Yeah, I haven't done the multiple versions, which I think is actually a really good way to look at it. But I usually do, like, if I'm starting a new app idea or whatever, like, because a lot of times I just like to prototype. It's not even
Yeah.
hey, I'm going to build something that I'm going to ship. It's more like I've got a day or 2 days over the weekend or something, and I'm like, okay, I always run into that blank slate problem, that like getting the
Mm-hmm.
boilerplate setup problem, where it's like I spend more time thinking, oh, I'm going to use this technology or whatever because I haven't done it before. And then my time's up and I've done nothing, like I haven't actually
Then,
achieved anything.
yep.
And so it's like, what I'm trying to like train myself to do now is say like, okay, go to Claude or ChatGPT or whatever and just say like, okay, I want to build these three features or this one feature or whatever. Like, figure out like a very small feature set for an app that I want to do. And usually it's like something that'll help me personally, rather than like, I want to build Spotify. I want to build, like it's
Yep.
nothing big like that. And it is saying like, how could we approach this that we could tackle, a prototype in 2 days or whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
have it like give you the rough outline of like, okay, we do this. And I always tell it explicitly, like, give me the file structure, like tell me how to set that up. Like, if I change my mind or disagree with how it is, you can always change it. You don't have to be like, okay, I'm just going to do whatever you tell me. But again, it's like it takes the decision making process that isn't that important at that stage out of it, making it so that you can just focus on the things that are actually important, which is like writing code, like actually like building a feature. And because so much of that time is usually like getting up to building the feature. And so like
Right.
if you can just kind of like skip that without like doing it in a way where like I don't have it necessarily do it for me. I have it do it where it's like, give me the steps and then I'll walk through the stuff that makes sense. And then you're learning as well. So like the next time I know like, okay, this is a folder structure that I like when I'm going into it. These are like the packages that I might need. And so it's like teaching you while giving you a way to figure it out without like having to do it all yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you touched on something that I've definitely appreciated about even just trying to one shot something just to prototype or just not have the blank page. Like
Yeah.
that thing killed what you described it perfectly. It's like you try and build whatever app, doesn't matter if it's Rails or Next or React or whatever.
Yeah.
You're trying to get it set up and all that boilerplate takes so long that by the time by the time you want to build the feature, you're like exhausted from just getting the
Yeah.
app ready. And that
Yeah.
takes that away, which is really nice. And it's not going to be the app that you deploy necessarily,
Sure.
but it at least teaches you or you learn what you liked, like you were saying, or like how you could build it maybe. And it's so easy to just throw it away
For sure.
and then start on the one that you actually want or you'll keep. So that's a really powerful thing that I've found with AI coding in general.
Yeah. And I think there's an important, at least for me personally, like an important distinction there where I tend to go with like the vibe coding, but doing it less one shot
Yep.
versus the one shot method is that for some people it might work great to do the one shot, like, and especially like as that prototype getting something up there. But for me, like I have an easier time understanding it if I'm like in the process of building out these things as I go. So I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I know this code is here. I know this code is here. Like I start learning the structure. Like I'm not writing much of the code at all at that point. I'm like essentially like going back and forth with Claude, actually in like Claude's chatbot
Yep.
interface instead of doing it in the agent, so that I can walk through it and kind of see like this is the structure, this is where it is, this is what this does. So that then when I want to like actually jump in and start developing things, I don't then have to like go and look through every single aspect of code and try to figure out like how did the bot put this together? Like you get that one shot code and you have to like essentially absorb it all to understand how it was built before you can start moving forward and doing things constructively from there. And so like in the end, it's not radically different in terms of like you get that prototype pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But from my perspective, it's like just that understanding and having that like, piece to the setup that just helps you learn it enough that you're then ready to do it versus like, okay, now I have to go back and understand what the bot did.
Right. Which is another important thing that I think is worth touching on here is we've mostly just talked about initial versions, prototypes,
Yeah,
whatever. But if you're actually going to put something into production that real users are going to use and whatever, like you need to understand at least enough of that system to be able to maintain it, either
yeah,
add a new feature, specifically, bugs. And, my experience with debugging, and or fixing bugs with the help of the LLMs, it's gotten a little bit better maybe with Cursor and
sure.
Windsurf. And I'm really curious about Claude Storm or Claude Code, and there's Claude Swarms now, which is
Sure.
something I've just learned about. So I don't have much to add. I'd love to talk about it maybe in another episode, but it still hasn't been perfect, and
Yeah.
there's numerous examples that you and I have both talked about in the past where we're trying to figure out, well, where's the bug using the LLM or the AI to help us out. And it's just like it goes in circles and circles and circles. And
Yeah.
half the time, it feels like my knowledge of Rails in this case is the thing that actually fixes the bug, not the LLM or the
Yeah.
AI.
Exactly.
And so that's another thing where I'm sure it'll get better as things, all this stuff progresses. It's going to get better, but it definitely is something where, yeah, you really want to understand that code, at least at a level that you're comfortable with it, especially if you're going to put it into production at some point.
Yeah, and this is the part with that really I think people struggle with right now is that there's no concept of security for people
Right.
that have never actually built a website. So they're like, I want to build, any type of user-facing app that takes personal data, even if it's like email addresses and stuff like that. People don't understand like, oh, you need to have your environment variables on your server. Like they can't be called because they don't even understand like the difference of a client side call versus a server side call. So there's
Mm-hmm.
like no concept of that. And that's where vibe coding is dangerous, is that it gives you something that theoretically you could run, but it doesn't seem to, security isn't a huge thing inside of it right now because most
Right.
of it is set up to run on a client side. Like it really
Mm-hmm.
isn't in a way like obviously if it's Ruby, it still has to run on the server, but there's still that fact that it doesn't know where you're running it. It doesn't know how you're deploying it because you probably don't know where you're running, deploying, or even what any of that means.
Right.
And
Right.
so like there's just these layers of knowledge gaps that, maybe the AI someday could help you with that. Maybe the AI will be like, okay, we're going to host it here. We know that these are going to be, environment variables. So we need to, hide those. I think that's where AI needs to go to be what people say it's going to be. And maybe it will, it's
Mm-hmm.
hard to say, but it's so far what I've seen is that there's a lack of agency with AI. Like it'll do what you tell it to and it will kind of like fill in the blanks, but it's not going to be like, hey, you're having a blatant security issue here
Right.
unless you like kind of catch it on it or like get
Yep.
lucky and it's decided that it's going to use this today versus what it might do other times. And that consistency itself is also kind of, a dangerous thing because it's not like there are some days where I give it prompts and it's like it does 10 things and it does great. And then the same day or another day, all of a sudden it's like everything I give it, it's wrong. And it's like, is that me? Is that just how LLMs work? Like, even for people that understand it, it's still not consistent. But if you don't know any better, it's just like, how would you know? It's, if it breaks, but that's the only way that you can really tell if something went wrong. So it's, yeah, I think there's a lot of room that it needs to improve to really like get to that point. But I mean, to our original kind of premise on this is like, it's still super valuable if you know what you're doing with it.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, in some ways that scares me, the whole security side, from the perspective of if all these apps are being built, and obviously it's not every app in the world, but
Yeah.
the more apps that get built in this manner where people don't fully understand, like, and I don't know that necessarily, and I come along and I throw my credit card in or whatever, like,
Yeah.
I mean, this stuff happens without AI
Oh, for
building
sure.
apps. So the more people we get into this ecosystem, not that that's I'm against that, but it's a little scary. You got to really think about it.
No, but I mean, that's a perfect point is that you have massive teams of people getting paid a ton of money and you still have data breaches. You still have people getting hacked. Like you have all these issues and AI doesn't fill that void. Like
Hmm.
AI isn't better at the security because a lot of the security things aren't like code. Like it is code, but it's actually like the logic behind the code, the reasoning behind it, like how somebody that's a human could exploit something that is written by humans. And
Hmm.
AI isn't to a point where they understand that nuance. Like there isn't that ability to say like, oh, I know that a human might approach it like this. My guess is it has no idea like social engineering. Like all that type of stuff. Like how do you account for that? Like there's
Yep.
just so many gaps there that it's like, yeah, to your point, somebody that can just come in and be like, hey, let's get a subscription service going. And they're running it all client side, storing your data on a server somewhere. Like because again, it happens anyway. And so much of
Hmm.
it too is like, I'm scared for the days that are already here of like vibe coding because everybody's on such deadline all the time. So it's like, okay, we got to do this fast. And that's where you're going to get even, big teams, little teams, whatever, using it for speed, but they don't have time to actually check it, understand it, make sure it works before it gets out anyway. And so there's just, you know, because you can write so much more faster, you can just produce so much more bad code
Yep.
if you've got it in the wrong people's hands. So there's just, I think the whole vibe coding is like this huge thing that everybody should be doing is just kind of scary because there are some huge ramifications. But for
Hmm.
people that actually know how to do it right, there's also like ramifications that are very positive if it is used correctly. And I just see too much news headlines and all that. That's, all the clickbait of like, yeah, you can build anything with one click. And that's just, I'm hoping if anything, we can help with this podcast to like shed some light on that of like how you can use it differently to still get awesome results, but do it in a way that you're actually like learning, you're still using your brain, and you're doing it in a way that you're not going to like bankrupt your company because you're
Yep.
vibe coding credit card transactions.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point, and maybe that's a good place to just transition a little bit. I think we could keep going for a long time. There's so
Yeah,
much to talk about. There's always going to be tons to talk about. But one of the things that I think at some point you and I have talked about doing here is maybe we just, not one shot an app, but maybe we just like pair together, go through some of our processes and, build something real. Let's
Yeah,
show some of those things that are important to learn and, how you would do it, whether you're building, with Cursor, Windsurf, Claude, whatever. I think it's important to pay attention to that. One of the things I'll just mention, like I like about Rails that doesn't have anything to do with AI, but it is fairly secure out of the box. And I'm sure that
sure.
React and Next have a lot of that stuff too. And that is one benefit of these systems using those, but it still gets old, it gets stale, and
Yeah,
you've got to know to pay attention to that stuff, and it doesn't cover everything.
yeah,
I could still, with or without AI, I could write something into my Rails app that allows someone to do SQL injection. Like
for sure.
there are some
Yeah,
protections there, but I
yeah.
mean, if I just let the AI go at it and it doesn't think about it, it could easily break, something or allow something like that, I should say.
Well, and again, that's a good point of context. Is like depending on how the AI writes something and how you then fill in the blanks, things like SQL injection could happen because the AI doesn't have the context to know that you're not escaping your string when you're
Right.
passing it in some way down the line. And so, yeah, there is the context when you're using Cursor and Windsurf and stuff like that, but it's from my experience, it's not as good as like somebody who actually knows the code base, somebody who actually understands. Like it's using semantic search to try
Yep.
to understand these things, which does, from where things like this were a couple of years ago, it's remarkable how good it is. But there are still so many times where like I give it the exact path and like line of code and it still struggles. It's like, let me just read this entire file. And like it reads, 200 lines of the 600 lines and then stops because it found something and then
Yep.
doesn't keep going. And so, but again, like you have to understand that aspect to it to be able to utilize it fully and know like, okay, my guess is you probably didn't understand the full context of this and like
Hmm.
or know to like give it the context to be like, okay, look in this file, this file, this file, and like give it more things explicitly pointed out. And so yeah, it's very much that you got to kind of understand it to be able to do it. But um I'm going off on a tangent here, but
Now you're all
it,
good.
it's really just yeah, like I think having that baseline, like you say, like because it's going to use Rails, it's going to use React, it's going to use stuff that's standard. It's good for people that don't know. But I think you can, especially nowadays with like all the web search and stuff, like you can give it context of like documentation and stuff too.
Yeah.
But there's just this whole world of knowledge you need to understand enough to like give it that context.
Hmm. Yep. Yeah, exactly. Well, this being our first episode, I just thought on the fly of a new little segment we could try just for fun, and it'll kind of be a
Sure.
good place for us to close. Um, is there any like cool AI news that's not related to everything we just talked about, but anything that, whether it's programming or not, that you have seen this week and you want to talk about briefly?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious to see where the new Claude artifacts are going. Like I use Claude as my, go-to for any bot type stuff. Mainly
Hmm.
just it has a different feel to me. I don't know. I've always been a contrarian, so most people use ChatGPT, so I guess that's part of it. But yeah, like artifacts was one of the first, like ways to actually show like what you're building inside of a chatbot. But now they've spun that out into it's almost like individual service that you can provide apps to other people that they can use their subscription for, and it's interesting. I haven't done a lot of research on it yet, but I kind of want to push on that and see. How about you?
Yeah, that's interesting. I definitely saw that email, and but for me, one of the things that I've seen this week, I already kind of mentioned it earlier, but like the Claude Swarm stuff, which I don't even know how that interacts with the stuff you were just talking about, but it definitely seems like Anthropic and Claude there's some interesting things going on there, and I forget the name of it. I'll put it in the show notes. But there was also related to the whole Claude Swarm thing. I just saw last night. Obi Fernandez, who's pretty prominent in the Rails community, he pushed out again, I forget the name. It's a gem though that basically uses Claude Swarms to help you build in your Rails apps. And kind of
Interesting.
going back to the whole like I'm not going to say one shot. I haven't even tried it, but it's an interesting way to get more context, though, from my
Sure.
understanding, anyways, and also have like what I gathered from it is the way it works is like you've got the swarm, and it basically like one, and I don't know all the right terminology, but like one of them knows about your controllers, one of them knows about your
Okay.
views, and then there's like at the very top there's the control, not the controller, but the orchestrator or whatever the word
Sure.
is
Yep.
that kind of like tells each one where to go. And I'm interested to explore it. That's something that I just learned about yesterday. I haven't even had time to dive into it. Um, yeah, that's what I'm been thinking about.
Yeah, no, it seems like agents used that way can be a very interesting concept. We can get into agents someday too, then
Yeah,
where there's concerns there as well. But yeah, I think in a code perspective, having multiple, things working on it with that kind of oversight could be really fascinating.
yeah, definitely. Cool. Well, this is probably a good place to wrap up. If you made it this far into the video, awesome. Maybe you could like and subscribe, leave some nice comments down below, and we're looking forward to putting more of these out. Anything else you want to add, Baird? I guess actually we should say where we can be found on the internet besides this podcast. Is there anywhere you want to point people to?
Not at the moment, but maybe someday.
Fair enough. Yeah, for me, it's usually just my X, Twitter. I'll put that in the show notes. I think I'm Brendan WB, but honestly I don't pay that much attention to it. So, all right, cool. Well, been good chatting, and we'll do
Yeah,
this again soon.
sounds good.